Sports car fans, rejoice! It is a 100% sports car focused video today, and we will be talking about the fallout from Petit Le Mans, which was this weekend because a lot of eras ended and many are about to begin. Case in point, Corvette will be headed to the Grand Touring Daytona class next year, and I have a bunch of thoughts about it. Let's get into it. And welcome back to the channel. Big weekend last weekend in sports car racing. Petit Le Mans at Road Atlanta, which to me is my second favorite race unobjectively the entire year. Behind the Indianapolis 500, I think the 10 hours at Road Atlanta is just so fun. Essentially the perfect racetrack for multi-class sports car racing. There's not a bad corner there. You get everything you want and nothing you don't, and it just leads to a great event. Great atmosphere, and I was there. There was no coverage. I just kind of felt like after the 2 years of hell we've kind of all been through, that I just wanted to go back and experience a race that I really enjoyed as a fan. And I had a great time. In fact, one of the people who watches this channel actually let me go up in his scaffolding, which was just as sketchy as it looks in this photo for the Michelin Pilot race. But that was a great perspective, and thank you for that opportunity. It was great to see a lot of people. I saw Ryan Vargas, met him for the first time. He was there. Hopefully, hey, let's get him a GTD ride at Daytona pretty soon. And a bunch of other guys, some of which I can't name because I talked about some insider things with them, but you'll know about some of those things in due time. I want to talk about Petit Le Mans first, the race itself, because like I said, it was the end of a lot of eras. In particular, it was the end of the GT Le Mans class, and it was also the end of the Mazda prototype program. I want to talk about GT Le Mans first because we'll be talking about GT racing a little bit later in this video. But the GT Le Mans class and its last race was really quite special to me because in a lot of ways it's kind of the last remnant of what was the American Le Mans series, which was the kind of genesis of my passion for sports car racing. I discovered ALMS back in 2008, which in a lot of ways was the best season of American Le Mans Series competition. What drew me in was the prototypes, and really what continues to draw me into sports car racing is the competition and prototype. And back then it was fantastic. You had the RS Spyders, you had the ARX Acuras, you had the Audi R10s, and then you had the Peugeots show up from time to time. Great racing. But at the same time, you had a great GT field, really an all-time great GT field. And it was so good that despite the fact that the ALMS started nosediving in terms of grid quality, the GT field, which was at that time called GT2, then it was called GT, and eventually morphed into what we now know as GT Le Mans, was really the highlight and really what brought people in. And when they merged with Grand Am in 2014, they kept GTLM exactly as it had been in ALMS, going even as far as to keep open tire competition, which was a big no-no in the NASCAR run. You know, you must run Continental Grand Am at the time. So you had not only all of the Michelin cars, which of course Michelin eventually took over the spec tire, and now everybody runs Michelins, but you also had Falcon, their factory Porsche team, which ran for a couple of years in the Merge series. So really, you know, while the cars and stars have changed throughout GTLM, in a lot of ways this was the old GT2 class, which started way back in the mid-2000s and has really defined this era of sports car racing. So to see that class end is definitely bittersweet, and I would definitely say much more bitter, at least for me, because in a lot of ways, and it's always been the discussion for me, and I know a few people on the sports car side, particularly some of my friends in the media, hate it when I say this, but for whatever reason, the GT3 class never has had the same kind of connection that I have felt to a GTE, or even if you go further back, like a GT1. That may change with GTD Pro when we start seeing factory efforts and factory drivers totally across the board. And we've seen some of that in SRO. I know I was at the 8 Hours of Indianapolis, and there was a totally pro factory class, which was actually pretty good. So I have some high hopes for IMSA in GTD Pro. But at the same time, the GTLM class was thankfully our best grid of the year. You had 2 Corvettes, 2 BMWs, and 2 Porsches, with the WeatherTech team entering an extra Porsche with full-on factory support, even if they didn't say that out loud. The race came down to a battle between the number 4 Corvette after the number 3 was involved in a massive shunt that took out half of the GT field, including like 7 GTD cars and the 3 Corvette. But also the race for the win came down to the 2 WeatherTech Porsches. So the 97 was running up front, and they made contact with the number 4 Corvette, who was driven by former Porsche driver Nick Tandy. The 97 ended up getting off of sequence. They made an early pit stop, which actually ultimately ended up undercutting them, both the 79 and 4 cars. So the 97 was ahead of both of those cars. Then the 4 had a failure, whether it was due to the contact earlier with the 97 car or whether it was due to contact with the, at the time, overall leader Mazda. We'll get back to that. The result was the same, and the number 4 Corvette fell out of the race. The BMWs were fast in the early part of the race, but seemed to kind of fall off. So the battle came down to the 97 and 79 Porsches. And then, I don't have it 100% confirmed because it's hearsay. But the scuttlebutt was it was team orders. The 97, which was the partial season car, swapped places with the full season car, number 79. So the number 79 car ultimately came across the line first and won the final GTLM race. Yeah, make of that what you will. But yeah, so that was the end of the class. That's the end of GTLM. Next year, it'll be, well, I say that, but we'll talk about that later in the Corvette section. Mazda was in their final race, and how ironic that one of the biggest storylines ended up becoming also one of the biggest storylines in terms of sports car racing at Petit Le Mans. So the Mazda was quick. It wasn't the outright quickest car. They qualified second overall, but when the race began, the Mazda eventually got into the lead and looked very strong. Then they had an electronics issue. Had to bring the car into the pits, lost a couple of laps, fixed the issue, but were way, way behind. Thankfully, you had a lot of crashes and a lot of yellows in this race. This was a very yellow-stricken race. And because of IMSA's rules, essentially they give lucky dogs to every car that is a lap down. I hate it. It's not pure, but NASCAR owns the series. What are you going to do? So Mazda eventually worked their way back onto the lead lap, but at the tail end of the DPI field. And because it's modern era sports car racing and the attrition rate was not high at all, at least in the DPI field, they had to pass the entire DPI field to get to the front and win the race. And that they did. And from that perspective, it was incredibly impressive that Mazda went out on a win. Because if you think about it, you know, for years and years and years, the Mazda program was a meme, unfortunately. Their cars were lightning quick at times. They also usually burned down on the side of the road. But in recent years, the Mazda program has found a way to not only make their chassis work, but make their engine work, make their electronics work, all the things working together. And ultimately, I feel lucky as a race fan because I got to see their first win at Watkins Glen, and I got to see their last win at Petit Le Mans. And in between those two wins, there were several major wins, including the 12 Hours of Sebring last year. So the Mazda program ultimately goes out on a high note, and frankly, the last couple of years of the program, I would say, were a high note. In a lot of ways, the Mazda prototype was really kind of the true to form DPI. There was no, you look at like the Cadillac, and it is very similar to the Dallara LMP2. If you look at the Mazda, it is very much a Mazda, despite being based on the Multimatic Riley prototype that doesn't even run anymore because it's uncompetitive in the LMP2 class. But, I love Petit Le Mans, and I can't wait. Hopefully, we'll actually have full coverage like we did the year prior next year. but it was nice to experience it as a fan, a true fan, once again, for the first time since 2011. But one thing that I am still kind of, I won't say not a fan of, but I'm still iffy on, is how Corvette is going to be involved in GTD Pro. Now, GTD Pro, if you don't know, it was announced at Daytona this year, is the new top GT category for IMSA. It will be all pro drivers in GT3 spec equipment, which is the same equipment that is used in GTD. Now, Corvette next year and into 2023 will be running a version of the GTLM Corvette in GTD Pro. They have been given a waiver to run GTLM equipment in a GTD category. Now, they will change the car quite a bit, adding electronics and aerodynamic parts and XYZ. It will not be the same as a GTLM car. It will have reduced power as well. What that has done is it means that Corvette will be splitting their time between IMSA and the World Endurance Championship. One car will be converted to GTD spec and race in IMSA, while the other car will go over to Europe and race in the World Championship. Two cars will be entered at Le Mans. Both of those, of course, will be in GTLM spec. And by the time 2024 rolls around, Corvette will have developed a brand new Z06-based GT3, fully spec'd GT3 Corvette that will be privately entered only. And at the time, they do not have an intention to run a factory Corvette Z06 GT3 car. Does that confuse you? Welcome to modern sports car racing. So GTD Pro, the jury's out because we haven't seen a race, obviously. I think there's some potential there. I think there's no doubt there's potential there. And objectively, they are going to have a better GT Pro grid than they did this year, where the vast majority of the races, there were only 3 cars that showed up. You had the 2 Corvettes, and you had the WeatherTech Porsche. Now it looks like you're going to have entries from Corvette, BMW, probably only 1 car. Lamborghini is looking to enter, probably only 1 car. Porsche, unsure. Will they enter 1 car? Will they enter no cars? Will they enter 2 cars? Will private teams enter GTD Pro? Who knows? Lexus has already committed to enter 1 of their cars, moving it from the GTD AM rank to GTD Pro. The other one will stay in the GTE or GTD AM class. Again, confusing terminology. It's sports car racing, baby. So you'll have a better grid of cars in GTD Pro. I am concerned that the Corvette will be the rooster in the henhouse, which is to say, with a balance of performance formula, which you see in GTD, the GT3 regulations are pretty, set in stone. You have a general idea of how the BOP is going to work out between the cars because the formula has been around for so long. When you stick a GTLM car in there, that is being converted to GT3 specs, we're just going to have to wait and see. This is going to be the only type of its car running in any kind of a GTD class for the next 2 years. It's not going to Europe. It's not going to race in the Nürburgring 24 hours. It is well and truly a special, which in the current version of GT3, you're really not supposed to have. If you think back to Pirelli World Challenge, ironically, General Motors has done this before. They had a 2 to 3 car entry in Pirelli World Challenge and were eventually kindly told that you cannot do that anymore. So the Cadillacs went away. So now you have the same situation happening in IMSA. And if the Corvette ends up being a beast, it will be balance of performance. It'll win a bunch of races. I wouldn't be surprised if the Corvette goes out and wins Daytona. They'll either. This is the thing. They won't. It'll be very difficult for them to spec that car right off the bat. So they will either be blindingly fast and they'll win Daytona and GTD running away, or they will be painstakingly slow and gradually, as the year goes on, they'll get faster and faster because the rules makers will continue to lessen restrictions on that car until it's competitive. We'll have to wait and see. But I think that's the big problem with this, is that, you had to keep Corvette. In fact, I remember when they announced this, I was like, you can't announce something like this without at least some sort of an intention that Corvette's going to enter. Corvette is a lot of the reason a lot of tickets for IMSA races are sold. It's a reason a lot of the merchandise is sold. It's a reason a lot of general fan interest, kind of from the casual racing audience, comes to IMSA. Even if it's for a couple of races a year, they want to see how Corvette's doing. If they just want to watch 2 races a year, it's going to be Daytona 24, Le Mans 24, and all they care about is where Corvette is. And they get mad when you show the prototypes. But so it was from the beginning, you could not lose Corvette. So immediately I realized that you're going to compromise these regulations until you get a new GT3 formula, which is coming in 2024. So it is going to be a bit disappointing that you have essentially compromised GT3 regulations in GTD Pro, which again kind of begs the question, why don't all the other manufacturers just run their GTLM cars in GTD Pro? And then it becomes a question of, well, why didn't you just keep GTLM? We'll have to wait and see. If the car counts are better, which they are for next year, there's no room for me to complain. But if it goes back to 3 cars in 2023, then I'm going to complain that GTLM didn't stay around for a couple more years. Because ultimately, what's happening in the World Championship appears to me to be that GT racing is going to be exclusively Pro-Am, meaning if you want to run a GT car, you're going to have a pay driver or someone who doesn't race professionally. And prototype is going to be where the factories are kind of moved. To me, that would help sports car racing a lot, and here's why. If sports car racing has 1 Pro class and 1 AM class, and the Pro class is what is racing for the overall win, and the AM class is GT cars that people can still connect with, you have 2 classes that are marketable. You still have the room for the gentleman driver, but you also have room for the factories, and those 2 things do not intermix. And that would be great, because then you can stop giving 50 bazillion trophies out at the end of the race. You have 2 classes, 2 winners, recognizable cars in each class, and things that the fans can root for. And if by 2024, IMSA and World Endurance Championship can move to that formula, if this is where this is all heading, where the prototype category and the GT category are one of each, I think that would be great. We'll have to wait and see. Things in sport. This is one thing. If you're a new sports car fan, you're going to just have to realize there will be massive peaks and massive values. There is no such thing as stability in sports car racing. It's about to get awesome for a couple of years, and then it's going to suck. And that's just how it goes. So, that's my big sports car rant and ramble for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, leave a comment. Let me know if you want me to do more sports car content, and leave a like on this video. I've got more stuff to talk about tomorrow, including Doge in NASCAR. Yes, a second video. That means I've got some more information. You're going to want to tune in for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport content, and I will see you in the next video.